Hello and welcome. You're watching this special edition on CNN News 18 on Transforming India with me, Poonam Burde. India's rapid economic growth and technological advancement hinges on securing a sustainable supply of critical minerals and metals. These essential resources are the lifeblood of the modern world. They power everything from our homes to clean energy to the phones in our hand to the laptops to cutting-edge technology that is used in defense. We are now looking to shed light on the significance of why this is important. India's future. Let's explore the strategies for ensuring their availability as well. What are the challenges? How do we overcome them? Now, last year in June, India came out with its first comprehensive report on critical minerals. It identified a list of 30 minerals. Now, different countries have different lists like these. Many countries have much more than this. This was a part of a focused strategy by India to push the country towards self-reliance. Atmanirbharta, as the Prime Minister and this government talks of very often. Later that year, that is in 2023, we saw an auction take place, all in a bid by the government to also bring in private players to build on the public-private partnership. So why is this important? What is the need for harnessing these critical minerals, and how can India play the role of a global force to reckon with? We discuss that with our panelists who join us here. Mayur Karmarkar, Managing Director of International Copper Association India, joins us on this broadcast. Professor GautamDesiraju, an Emeritus Professor at the India Institute of Science, is also with us. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us here and sharing your perspective. I want to begin by asking you, Professor Desiraju, let's begin with the basics and let's open this up to our viewers of why exactly we're talking about this. Why are these critical minerals and metals so important? And why are we hearing of it in the recent past so much?
Yes, metals have always been important for the development and growth of a country, right from when civilized man came on the planet. You have the Bronze Age and the Copper Age and the Iron Age and so on. Now, in recent times, what has happened is that some of these metals, by the way, there are, for the lay people, there are about 70 or 80 known metals today. And out of these, 40 to 50 are fairly common. I mean, not really uncommon, and are used in some way or the other. Now, some of these metals are what are called critical. And it's important to know what is the meaning of this word critical. For a metal to be critical or a mineral to be critical, the first condition is that it should be required for some essential purpose. It has to be involved in the manufacture of some essential thing which is connected with, say, medicine, fertilizers, health, communication, defense, you name it. It should be required for some very important purpose. The second condition which the metal should follow to be critical is that some other country can adversely affect your supply chain to get hold of that metal. So, if another country is in a position to interfere with your getting the amount of metal that you need, then that is the second criteria of criticality. Third and last, sometimes a metal simply becomes critical because you suddenly need much more of it than you are able to generate on your own. That's why even common metals like iron and aluminium sometimes become critical. On the other hand, let's also talk about the word strategic. Most of these strategic metals could also be critical, but they are required for some essential purpose that concerns defense, warfare, and stuff like that. Things that have to do with the safety and security of the country. And it's important to know that critical and strategic don't always mean the same. I'll give you an example. There are a group of metals called rare earths, and these rare earths are very commonly found in China. They are very strategic for China and for all the countries. But for China, they are not very critical because they have them in very large amounts. For a country like India, which may or may not have that much, then it also becomes critical. So, actually, I could say that there are practically very few things you can go about even in your daily life today without using one of these critical metals. I mean, take an ordinary motor car which you drive about. It contains about 20 kilograms of a metal called cerium. And the cerium is something that is absolutely required if you're going to make a motor gun. And if you don't have enough of it, well, you have to import it or something of the sort. Luckily, it is not such a rare metal, but it just gives you an example to show how important these various metals have become.
Absolutely. And Mayur Karmarkar, I want to get you in on that as well. Several of these, like Professor was also pointing out, several of these metals, some not so critical maybe as far as the daily usage or the dependence on them, but they do become critical in the kind of needs and wants we as a country have. Now, we're looking at self-reliance and Atmanirbharta in multiple forums, be it as far as manufacturing is concerned or defense is concerned, which is why all of this it becomes even more significant, isn't it?
That's right. So look at the current trend. Your question earlier was that why the critical mineral is becoming important topic for many countries. There are pledge towards the climate change, and we are talking about decarbonization by 2040. India is committed to have it by 2070. So, up till now, for the economic development, energy was critical, and we were talking about coal and oil, etc. But now the entire shift has moved from the fossil fuel to the renewable energies. Now, all those renewable energies required to produce from metals, and the metals required for that are become more critical for every country perspective. So there are two aspects to the critical mineral. One is that economic importance overall. Within that, whether any disruption is going to create a problem for overall economic development. Then there's the issue of the identifying the GDP multiplier. That means, 1 kilogram of particular metal adds to how much to the economy. So that's the economic development aspect there. And the last but most important thing is where is the supply risk you have overall. So, looking at the different countries' initiative, they have identified the different minerals, and within that, all the minerals which are required for the energy transition or clean energy technology are more critical. Uh, Naming them like, what we are talking about, lithium, the discovery of lithium in Jammu Kashmir, Indian perspective. That lithium is used for making the lithium ion battery, LFP battery, we used to say that. And that is a very important element to the battery chemistry going forward. So having that resource for the energy transition for the automotive sector is important. Copper particularly has diverse usage, and it is largely a GDP multiplier. Although there is no supply risk involved, particularly from the India perspective, this metal was not explored earlier. Even in India and mining sector, you have seen the overall exploration is largely focusing on iron, bauxite, coal, then limestone, which were important back then for the adding to the economic value overall during that time to the country's development. But going forward, copper is diverse use in all the sectors, including building construction, infrastructure, medicine, pharmaceutical, even agriculture, solar. It has become strategically important.
Absolutely. With importance, though, unfortunately, also come challenges. We were talking about copper, Mayur Karmakar, and we've seen the kind of protests that have taken place, especially as far as the Sterlite copper plant went in Tuticorin. The closure of the plant also then took place. And that definitely has had an impact as far as India's copper production and its related industries are concerned. So how do we then strike that sort of a balance? How do we work around that, that we also look at what's important in terms of progress and development of the country versus what the locals, the residents have to say as well?
Yeah, I mean, for all the critical mineral going forward, the ESG is very important. That is, every mining processing operation should have a topmost importance of environmental, social, and the governance, aspects of the metal processing. Any issue on a social has to be considered as a priority going forward. So, particularly the Tuticorin issue, which happened in 2018. Unfortunately, the resolution to that issue to different courts has taken more than 5 years, and such delays can be avoided. Uh, and largely, if you really look at the copper as a mineral in the country, We were leading in the processing of that mineral. We were having, larger exports back then because the capacities were high. We were the larger processor in the country, but incidents like Tuticorin has made us largely the net importer.
Absolutely. And several challenges, Professor Desiraju, like these will keep coming up. There are several of these challenges that we will face in the future as well. Outdated technology, these environmental regulations and policies that we have in place, the limitations as far as infrastructure goes, they are just a few of those that we may encounter in the way forward. How do you then think we overcome those?
This is a very good question. And I'm glad Mr. Karmakar has brought up the issue of copper, because copper is definitely critical and it could even be strategic. Let's not forget that copper is very important for the transmission of electricity. However, that electricity may be generated through non-conventional means also. You're going to need copper wires to transmit this electricity. Now, the affair of the Sterlite plant, I'd like to take it up a little bit more. It is an example of how some adversary country, let's not name anybody, is able to take advantage of local weaknesses and bring something which is very important for us economically to a grinding halt. The Sterlite incident in Thoothukudi in Tamil Nadu has been going on for many years, and various political parties were involved at various times. And it is also true that some of the people, the activists, who have persuaded the local people that this plant was polluting, the people themselves are now saying that they were misled. So there is a lot of politics involved, and it would just go to emphasize that today scientific matters can really get involved with political matters and geostrategic matters. So I think at the level of the central government, many of these critical metals and strategic metals, you have to have special laws and rules. And most scientific people will agree. I mean, look, mankind has been smelting copper for more than 2,500 years. So copper is not, the metallurgy of copper is not particularly rare or exotic. And everybody knows that in a copper smelter, you're going to get sulfur dioxide, which is a pollutant. All the copper smelters take care of the sulfur dioxide properly. In fact, it leads to a specific side industry in the manufacture of sulfuric acid, which was also very important in Thoothukudi. So I'm afraid to say that because of maybe governments that were not cautious enough to realize what was happening in the background, we have allowed this kind of a situation to happen. It's very good that the Adani Group has started a copper smelter in Gujarat. But I'll ask an open question to the audience and to the panelists. Tomorrow there will be another critical metal. There'll be a strategic metal. How do we know that some adversary country will not come and mess up our internal and external supply chains? This is something that I think the government cannot just behave in a reactive way. It should behave in a proactive way. We should anticipate what the problems are for each of these metals and take adequate precautions well in advance. I think Sterlite has been a very good wake-up call to us as to what might happen. Please also notice that the adversary country chose a location where the domestic politics was particularly tempestuous, and they were able to pick the target place very, very well. So somebody who knew what they were doing, this is a kind of warfare. These are the new wars that are being fought. Wars today through supply chains do not have to be fought with weapons and with people losing their lives. We lose on the economy, which is far more dangerous, in my opinion.
Professor Desiraju, it's interesting you talk about wars because that's exactly what I was going to next. And joining us on this broadcast is also Professor A.G. Iyer. He's the president of the Renewable Energy Promotion Association. And Professor, if you could hear what Professor Desiraju was also talking about, that's what I want to ask. 50 years ago, we saw wars and conflicts that took place over crude oil. Are these rare earth minerals, are these critical minerals and metals the new crude oil, so to say? Is that what wars are going to be fought on?
Yeah, I said this in 2011, roughly, in Ras Al Khaimah in the Middle East, that silicon is the next oil. And what I said, actually, none other than Bill Clinton, the ex-president of the United States of America, took over on the next day. because I was telling my friends in the Middle East, the Arabs, that basically silicon is going to be the next oil. So what you're effectively saying is true, because every rare earth metal or every material that is the future for us is the future oil. There's no two words about that. And in fact, now it's not only this. We need titanium. It's a very special alloy material. We need it for silicon. Now we will need probably other material which we can hybridize. Basically like for solar SPV manufacturing, advanced materials are coming in. One advanced material that I was working on was phenyl silane, which gives efficiencies beyond 30% and 35%. So such material could be developed in the future. So there is basically a very great potential for rare earth materials and metals, and superconductivity will go to hyperconductivity. That is the next zone we are talking about, and ultra high conductivity. So if we can go to these areas, definitely India will be leading. I'll give you one example of a material that India is in abundance, but we are not doing work over there, and that is basically the nuclear area. In nuclear, India has the largest deposits of thorium in the world, and commercially scalable to 30% of the total world capacity. And with that kind of a thing, we have still not built a thorium reactor. We're building conventional reactors. We'll increase the capacity to 700 megawatt, but what effectively we'll do, we'll keep importing the uranium as a fuel, and we'll keep depending on the nuclear supplies group. So these are issues that are going to be the key issues that India should talk about. See, low-hanging fruit would be exactly going to nuclear energy using thorium. And then trying to look at whether in the electric vehicle, see, electric vehicle business is not going to be what we are seeing today. We are seeing lithium-ion batteries, and that's the material we're looking at. No, we would be looking at advanced battery tech, but at the most important area that will come in is hydrogen as the fuel. So hydrogen fuel cell-based electric vehicles will be the future. So it's not only about material, but it's also identifying what is the future area that we go to. So unless we have a very clear strategic hybridization of our needs and indigenization of raw material for India, and also controlling the source of energy or source of resource for making other products. For example, you can't make steel without manganese. Luckily, India has, in the central India, Nagpur and around that area, we have a large quantum of manganese being mined in India by none other than Manganese Ore India Limited. It's a very, I would say, very strategic company. So mining of manganese is important to continue making large grade of steel, and future steel industry will depend on it. Same way I was hearing about copper. It may not be copper. We may have to go to aluminum now. Aluminum is all pervading material. It will go to conductivity. It will go to electricity. It will also be a material for packaging for us. So we need to look multidimensional in our approach than just being afraid of somebody coming in and creating a national security threat. That is the second area. But the first area is whether we are doing justice to what we have as natural resources in India. My answer is no. We have not done justice to ourselves.
So it's not just harnessing, but also exploration is also important. We have to get to the first step of trying to figure out what we have, how to do better with what we already have and harness it better. Professor Desiraju, I believe you have a point to make before I get you in on the other question that I had to ask you.
I'll be very, very brief. Professor Iyer has mentioned so many relevant points. Very quickly, let me say in the matter of rare earths, if India is able to control the supply chain of any one of these 17 rare earths, that is actually good enough. The idea is to put a choke point for some other country. The second thing I want to mention, he said about lithium. Most people don't realize that lithium goes along with another metal called cobalt in these renewable batteries. And the geostrategy of cobalt is much more tricky than that of lithium. We're making a great deal of fuss about the lithium that has been found. But please remember that cobalt is mostly found in a very unstable country in Africa called the Democratic Republic of Congo. And the geopolitical conditions there are very, very serious. And many countries like China are trying to actually buy up that whole country in order to control their cobalt supplies. That is the second thing. The third point, which I wish to mention before you go to Mr. Karmarkar, is that what we may need today is not what we may need tomorrow. He did mention about aluminium. I will still say respectfully that the advantages of copper in terms of thermal electrical conductivity are still very, very great. And the terms of efficiency of electricity transmission, well, it's a toss-up between copper and aluminium. I guess both are important, but this is not to undermine the importance of copper. Thank you.
Absolutely, and that is also what Professor Iyer was trying to point at, that, we have a lot already. We haven't really had perhaps the sense or the wisdom to harness it better, to explore it better. And we definitely need global cooperation, collaboration for that. And Mayur Karmarkar, is that why the kind of collaborations we're now looking at, or the kind of pacts that we're signing with different countries, including being a part of this US-led alliance, is that why then this becomes so significant? We have a lot of learning to do, of course, and perhaps we in a few years will also reach a stage where we could be imparting out that wisdom and knowledge as well.
I totally agree. And in fact, based on that, after the critical mineral list was announced by Ministry of Mine, the team in Ministry of Mine is working on, the exploration. That is something which was not done to the fullest extent. That is where Professor Iyer was mentioning that we don't have a good exploration of all the minerals within a country. So Ministry of Mines is critically looking at for all these 30 metals, that how we can have the exploration, how we can do mining and accelerate the mining. In fact, for that there was the RFP was invited for these identified mines, which were 20 auctions were announced. The third thing is that Ministry of Mines is also looking at the processing technologies, because not every critical mineral technologies we have it now.
Absolutely. It also has to do a lot with India's sustainable development goals, isn't it? And I want to get in Professor Iyer in on that as well. We're seeing the kind of...
I just want to make one point.
Yes, sir, go ahead.
On a processing part, if you see the IEA's recent study, even the processing technologies and processing capacities has been dominated or polarized with one country globally. So adding the processing capacity also is important. Otherwise, disruptions may happen even at the processing end. It's not only at mining, but also processing.
Sure. So we've been discussing we have to have a multifold approach really to this. Professor Iyer, we're talking about accelerated energy transitions. The kind of technologies for green energy is something that is being spoken of, is being worked on as well. India does have a net zero emissions goal by 2030, which is also why it's important that this sort of harnessing, this sort of exploration happens at a greater pace now.
Yeah, see, there are two issues here. On one side, we have been telling the world that we will go net zero overall as a nation by 2070. And I'm not in agreement with that, Toto, because if America, which has actually made more coal power, and China, which is making more power from coal even than America, almost 3 times more than America, then if India, which is only 200 gigawatt hour of coal power, why we are not committing to ideas like 2047 or 2050? And it is very much viable. So I'm very happy that I see leading companies like Reliance talking about 2030 and 35. And we have also many other corporates, I would say 10 top companies, if you name them, including the Adanis and the Mahindras, and almost all the national corporate sector in the private sector is ready for a greater challenge of 2040 maybe. And I am dealing with public sector. Today you are airing me from Goa at the India Energy Week. And I'm telling you, I'm discussing with a lot of people. So, and here, there are other sources that have come in. Like, you're talking of raw material. I'm talking of converting waste to huge quantum of agro waste can be converted to biogas. And we will be net exporter of gas than importing gas as on date. So that is exactly what I am trying to explain. Our 2040, 2050 timeline is ideal. 2030, maybe 2030, 35, you will see net zero for corporate India, or the private sector may do it before, and the public sector may join in by 2040. And overall for India, that is the rural economy and mass public, we would be able to join in by 2050. If we have these goals, I'm very sure that India would be a leading country of the world and showing the way to the rest of the continents how to do it. I wrote the book, Ideanomics, India, Middle East, and Africa. And I tell you, you talked about Sustainable Development Goal. My book says $40 trillion SDG economy by 2040. That is India, Middle East, and America. I'd be very happy if the Indian government takes my view and my book and implements a trade bloc called India, Middle East, and Africa trade bloc.
Those steps are definitely being taken. The government is looking at how we can better the situation with the resources that we have, how we can also then try and be the global leader, or at least a force to reckon with as far as every single aspect of this is concerned. This has been an enriching discussion. I thank you all, gentlemen, for joining us here on this broadcast and sharing your perspective. That brings us to the end of this special edition. I thank you so much for joining us and tuning in.